Hello everyone, and welcome to this special WHO Drug webinar, Advancing Medicine Safety through ISO IDMP, UMC's perspective. In the next 75 minutes, we will walk you through the IDMP standards and their various components. You will learn how the world is adapting to the standards. And we will also review how Uppsala Monitoring Center is helping to bring them to life. I'm Federica Santoro, Communications Officer at UMC and your host for today. I will be joined by my colleagues, Malin, Olof, Jenny, and Marilina, and they will cover different aspects of IDMP. All four of them will also be available for a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so do stay till the end and submit the questions as we go along. To do that, all you need to do is visit slido.com, type in the hashtag IDMP, and write your question in the chat. Handouts and the recording of the session will be available after the webinar. We will also ask you to fill in a short survey to give us your thoughts on the event. And now, without further ado, let's step into the world of IDMP. First up, to welcome you and set the stage is UMC Director Peter Hjelmström.
Hello, I'm Peter Hjelmström, Director of Uppsala Monitoring Center. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. The International Organization for Standardization, ISO, has developed a suite of 5 different standards for identification of medicinal products, IDMP. This represents a game-changing development in the world of pharmacovigilance. IDMP is designed to establish a common language, facilitating effective exchange of vital medicinal product data across the entire drug development lifecycle. At UMC, patient safety is our main driving force, and it is also the driving force behind ISO IDMP. By enhancing a harmonized data exchange, ISO IDMP enhances our ability to identify, evaluate and mitigate risks associated with medicinal products. At Uppsala Monitoring Center, we firmly believe in the need for collaboration. And ISO IDMP offers us a unique opportunity to strengthen global collaboration and information exchange worldwide. By adopting a standardized approach to data sharing, we can transcend geographical boundaries and leverage collective insights to improve pharmacovigilance practices worldwide. At UMC, we are committed to support the implementation of ISO IDMP standards and leverage their benefits to advance pharmacovigilance practices. During the webinar, I hope you will get a chance to learn more about the current status of IDMP and how various global stakeholders, including us here at UMC, are collaborating to implement these standards. Please enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Peter. So, as you all heard, the IDMP standards are a game-changing development. By establishing a common language, they will allow us to exchange vital information across the entire life cycle of medicines. But how will it all work? Here to break it down for us is Malin Fladvad, Head of WHO Drug Product Portfolio at UMC.
Hi, my name is Malin Fladvad, working at UMC with WHO Drug and IDMP. And today I will tell you about IDMP, its use cases and ongoing implementations. Many of you might already know about ISO IDMP, but let us start with the basics. IDMP stands for Identification of Medicinal Products, and it's a suite of 5 ISO standards that were released in 2012 and describe how to standardize information and create identifiers for medicinal products and the pharmaceutical products, as well as substances used in products, the pharmaceutical dose forms with units of presentations and route of administration, as well as strength and units of measurements. Implementing the ISO and IDMP standards globally would facilitate the unique identification of a medicinal product in the context of pharmacovigilance and the safety of medications throughout the world, both in communication between persons as well as in IT systems. The identifiers defined by ISO will be a combination of global and regional identifiers, where UMC is involved in the global PhPID as well as the global substance identifier. The identifiers for the complete medicinal product and packaged product will, however, be created nationally. In each country where the medicinal product is approved, the local regulatory authority assigns the national medicinal product identifier and the packaged identifier, since they are identifiers based on the size of packaging for that particular country. For example, in one country, the medicinal product may have 50 tablets in its package, where in another country, the package may contain 100 tablets. So even though the MPIDs and the package IDs will differ from country to country, the global PhPID and the substance identifier will remain the same for all countries. The PhPID will be created in 4 different levels, depending on the granularity of the information available, and of course based on the standards on the previous slide. The first level is generated using the unique global substance identifier only. The second level is generated using the substance identifier in combination with strength. And the third level is generated using the substance identifier in combination with dose form. And then the last, 4th level is generated using all 3 standards. One of the clever things with the IDMP standards, or more specifically the IDMP identifiers, is that they help identify products that are equivalent to each other, disregarding on the jurisdiction they are approved in. So in this example, you can see salbutamol that is marketed in many countries where the domestic product names vary. The level of detail on the package may also differ, as in this example where both salbutamol and salbutamol sulfate is used on the package. Products in this example do contain the same active ingredient, and they have the same pharmaceutical dose form and strength. So by linking equivalent products in different countries to a unique global PhPID for this specific pharmaceutical product, namely salbutamol sulfate, with a strength of 100 micrograms per actuation and the dose form suspension for inhalation, it is possible to conclude that these products are equivalent to each other, showing the great benefit of the global PhPID. The PhPID becomes the medicinal product's common denominator from country to country, regardless of where it is prescribed, dispensed, and used. Implementing a large set of new standards is challenging. So what is the overall benefit of IDMP? Pharmacovigilance was one of the first discussed use cases for IDMP, since it requires precise identification of medicinal products, and this is often beneficial to pool data for analysis from different countries. But there is a need for harmonization of medicinal product information in the entire life cycle, from development to product removal. Some of the benefits with implementing IDMP on a global level would be in the improved data quality, to have an accurate single data source leading to reduced or shared cost and greater productivity. It would also be easier to share information on a regional and global level and compare products across regions. IDMP implementation could also facilitate global supply chain and make it easier to identify and solve medicinal product shortages. So how will the process for pharmacovigilance and UMC be affected? Today we use food drug in most of our PV systems, from reporting through mobile apps and industry e-reporting and Vigiflow, to identification of Vigibase and publication of data in Vigilize and VigiAccess. Moving forward, we envision that the IDMP identifiers will be used by countries in reporting analysis of ITSRs, and we will then need to adapt our systems. To make this process as easy as possible, we envision that WHO drug, with an extension of the global PhPID and global substance ID, will be used. Having more detailed information on the medicines reported could improve analysis and better ensure information about the active ingredient, the dose taken by the patient, and facilitate identification of specific forms of a product that cause problems. So how is IDMP being implemented in different regions? US FDA are already using standards and terminologies compatible to most of the concepts presented in the IDMP standards, namely the Medicinal Product Identification, where they're using the National Drug Code, Substance Identification, where they have a regional Unicode, the Units of Measure, where UCOM is used, and they are also a leading partner in implementation of global IDMP together with EMA. For EMA, the ISO IDMP standards are mandated by the EU legislation, and EMA are implementing the ISO IDMP standards in a phased program for substances, products, organizations, and referentials. And they also use the HL7 FIRE standard to exchange and publication of data concerning medicinal products for human and veterinary use. Swissmedic in Switzerland is currently evaluating targets and priorities for the implementation of IDMP in connection with development of their internal systems. For the implementation of IDMP, Swissmedic will align as much as possible with the EU requirement, but will also take into account some specific local requirements. Health Canada is internationally engaged in the work for a global substance registry and IDMP. And under existing projects, Health Canada is working on accurately mapping pharmaceutical and biological substances to the unique global identifier. They have also undertaken other projects to accommodate the IDMP data model for health products. Other regulators, such as ANVISA and MHRA, are also pursuing IDMP implementations, looking into adaptation of their system and data. There are not so many guidelines on the use of IDMP today, but the UNICOM project, an EU-driven project for improved patient safety and better healthcare, they are focusing on implementation of the IDMP standards, both for regulatory purposes, for global pharmacovigilance, for advancing the cross-border digital health services, in particular e-prescribing, and also for better healthcare for all, so including the public health services, clinical research, data analysis, and artificial intelligence applications. In UNICOM, there are several resources developed, such as the IDMP in a capsule document, and there are several community of expertise webinars and public deliverables that are available on their website. So in March 2023, the US FDA published a guidance for industry that supports the development and the implementation of ISO IDMP. The guidance is available at the link on the slide and describes how FDA is working with stakeholders on implementation of global IDMP. So how far have we come with the implementation of global IDMP? Since the first version of the ISO IDMP standards in 2012, there has been a lot of activity within both US FDA and EMA towards implementation. FDA created the Global Substance Registration System, the GSRS, for substance information, and this system is now also used within the European Union to harmonize European substances for all the 27 member states. UMC are also using the same system for substance information needed for creation of the global PhPID. EMA and FDA also kicked off a formal collaboration on IDMP in 2019, and FDA collaborated with UMC on a first pilot for PhPID in 2021 which eventually led to the formation of the Global IDMP Working Group. So the Global IDMP Working Group was organized and chartered, followed several recommendations from a meeting in 2019 in Geneva about IDMP implementation. The initial charter members include the EMA, US FDA, and UMC, and nowadays additional members has also joined, such as Swissmedic, Health Canada, Anvisa, the INN group within WHO, as well as IFPMA representing the industry. So GIDIWIG is an international organization with the mission to conduct and report on projects leading to the establishment of a framework for the global implementation of ISO IDMP standards and the maintenance of the global identifiers and systems. To make sure that a robust framework for PhPID operations based on the ISO standards are developed, a worldwide collaboration between regulators and relevant experts all across the globe is pivotal. In addition to FDA and EMA, there are additional regulators such as Swissmedic and Anvisa participating in the effort, and standards organizations that manage the terminologies used for IDMP, such as EDQM for dose form and QGarden regarding plant substances used in natural medicines. There is close communication with the ISO TC215 Workgroup 6 that developed and maintained the ISO IDMP standards, and the European Project for IDMP Implementation, UNICOM. Another important player in global implementation of IDMP is IPRP, the International Pharmaceutical Regulators Program. To ensure that we in GIDIWIG would reach our goals to identify and develop consensus on processes, best practices, and operating model for the maintenance of global identifiers for marketed medicinal products, 5 different projects have been running to develop and verifying the process and the business rules for global PhPID. The 5 products are for the different parts of the PhPID, so for the global dose form identification, the global substance identification, strength definitions, the global PhPID maintenance operating model, and also an HL7 fire for IDMP. The challenges with the data harmonization that we have seen is mainly due to the diversity of the data, due to different descriptions and terminologies used in different jurisdictions globally. This makes an automatic assignment and global ID generation in principle impossible, since the description of the different elements, such as substance, dose form, strength, and units, will lead to different identifiers. The substances themselves are alone a big complexity, both for some simpler chemical molecules with different hydration levels, to proteins and vaccines, where the substance itself can be very complex and require strict definitions. The strength and the dose form usually also differ, and as you can see in this example for diclofenac cream, where the strength is expressed in different ways for all of these packages, where the product is really equivalent. As a part of the Global IDMP Working Group projects, we are developing the processes and the suggested business rules for global PhPID. GIDIWIG has been working with a number of datasets from different countries, including US, Brazil, Belgium, and Norway, where the GIDIWIG pharmacist expert team, consisting of pharmacists from FDA and UMC, are validating each product by reviewing the SMPC or labeling information to identify the substance, assign a global harmonized dose form expression, and consistently express strength and identify the correct unit. In many cases, additional information from the SPC are also needed, such as information on the product container, dosing, and administration. The proposed PhPID generation process is expected to apply for single requests as well as for entire national datasets when a country is starting to use the global identifiers. The business rules for global PhPID creation, as well as the operating model that you can see here, has been developed in collaboration with the Global IDMP Working Group consisting of the experts from many different countries, as I mentioned before. So if a pharmaceutical product lacks the required PhPID, a search can be made in the PhPID repository. And if no PhPID is found, a request is made for a new identifier. The pharmaceutical product information is then validated according to the business rules using relevant data from local registries and market authorization holders. If the validation rules cannot be applied, UMC will consult with the WHO International Expert Working Group. If the validation then is approved, UMC will generate the PhPID at all the relevant levels, and the code will be shared with the requesters and published in a repository. The demo versions of the different applications supporting the operating model for global PhPID are now up and running, and here is a picture showing the request application for global PhPID. A new PhPID can be requested either as a single request or in a batch, and the requester will need to submit information about the medicinal product they need to get the PhPID, including the information on the trade name, active ingredients, local dose form, strength, and unit. The data is then validated internally by UMC pharmacists, identifying the harmonized expression that will form the foundation of the global PhPID. When the PhPID is ready, it will be published with the accompanying harmonized information. And here is a snapshot of the publishing interface where you can see the PhPID on all 4 levels, the global substance identifier generated, the substance strength, and the harmonized dose form. If we look at the plan moving forward for global PhPID, we are during 2023 working in the Global IDMP Working Group on the definition of the operating model and the business rules for global PhPID, and are in parallel developing the applications needed for the operating model, including request validation, generation, and publication of the global PhPID. In Q4 of this year, we plan for an end-to-end testing of the operating model, testing a number of datasets from different countries to verify a number of use cases for the global PhPID. The plan is to be able to go live during 2024 and start onboarding a number of countries to generate the first global PhPID. Thank you for listening to this introduction on IDMP. Looking forward to talking to you later.
Thank you, Malin, for that overview. Malin will be joining the Q&A session at the end, so if you have any questions for her, please post them on slido.com with the hashtag IDMP. And now let's take a closer look at how substances, dose form, and strength are defined in the IDMP world. Here's an interview I recently recorded with 2 of my colleagues, UMC's substance expert Olof Lagerlund and terminology specialist Jenny Klint. Enjoy the conversation. Hi, Olof and Jenny, and welcome to this IDMP interview.
Hi.
Hi.
So today we will explain the IDMP standards in a little more detail, and we will focus specifically on the PhPID, Pharmaceutical Product Identifier, and its components. And we'll start with you, Olof. What is a PhPID and how do you build one?
Well, thanks for having us here, Frederica. To start with, the global PhPIDs that we talk about, that are basically similar products that we group together based on the active ingredient, dose form, and strength. And these are based on the ISO standard for the Pharmaceutical Product ID, the 11616. There are different levels of the PhPID, and depending on what kind of information you have, you can combine these aspects to produce a certain level. For instance, if you only have substance and dose form, but not the strength, then you would have a PhPID level 3. But the most important aspect is to harmonize the products globally. So if two products are the same, they should have the same PhPID, even if they are described in different ways in different countries.
Thanks for that introduction. So, from what you said, the most complete version of a PhPID will include information on active ingredients, dose form, and strength. And I suggest we look at these components one by one so that our listeners can understand a bit more of each one. Why don't we start with the active ingredient, or global substance identifier as it's known in IDMP jargon? Why do we need that standard?
Well, in order to get this harmonization on PhPID to see that they actually contain the same active ingredients, we need to know that that ingredient is unique, so you don't accidentally get two of the same thing in a PhPID. And the global substance identifier is how you describe, and it can be uniquely assigned to all types of substances used in medicinal products.
Right, but how do you make sure each identifier is unique? Because there are so many medicinal substances out there and already so many ways to describe them. How do you make sense of it all?
You follow the standard. It's the ISO 11238 in the case of the substances, which have information on how you should describe each substance type and the minimal fields for that. What you need for definition. Like for a chemical, you need a chemical structure and a name, and then depending if it's more information, you could have that as well. But you can imagine going through this, like a chemical structure is quite easy, but when you get to more complex sets of substances, you will need some kind of way to keep track of all of this. And there we started to use a substance registration system, SRS, that has been created to handling substances according to the IDMP standards. It's an open source software that was originally created by the US FDA about 10 years ago. And now it's used by both the US FDA and EMA as examples. And another nice thing with having like a common system, that we use the same system across the globe, is that it will be easier for different stakeholders to exchange the data in a structured way between the different stakeholders.
So we've covered now the active ingredient. Why don't we move over to the second PhPID component, the dose form? And now it's your turn, Jenny, to tell us more about that. What is the dose form, and why is it so important to include it in the standards?
The dose form is a physical manifestation of how the medicine is presented. Olof mentioned harmonization before, and that is something we work with a lot for the dose form when validating products. Today, the expression of dose form can vary globally. There are differences in granularity, or the level of detail, and that makes it difficult to map terminologies from one region to another. For the global PhPIDs, we are using 4 characteristics to describe the dose form. These are the basic dose form, the administration method, the intended site, and the release characteristic. And they all come from EDQM, the European Directorate for the Quality of Medicines and Healthcare.
Okay, so 4 dose form characteristics, but could you give us some examples of them so we understand a bit more what they're about?
Yes, of course. I can start with the basic dose form. That is a generalized description of the dose form. It could be, for example, a tablet, a solution, or a cream. The administration method describes how the product is intended to be administered, for example, swallowing, injection, or application. Intended site is the place in the body where the product should be administered. It could be oral, nasal, or parenteral. And finally, the release characteristic describe how long it takes for the active ingredient to be available after administration. The release characteristic for an immediate release formulation will be conventional, while for a prolonged release formulation, it will be prolonged. To find the information required to assign the correct characteristic, we use the dose form stated for the product, but that is not always enough. Often we need to look in different places in the summary of product characteristic or the product label because the data is not always structured and the similar terms may have different definitions. Also, in PhPID, we use the administrable dose form, and when that is different from the manufactured dose form, we need to find it out. For example, if we have an effervescent tablet, you will need to dissolve or disperse it in water before taking it, so the administrable dose form is then not a tablet, it's a solution or a suspension.
So there's a lot of information to collect and make sense of. And now moving on to the third and last PhPID component, the strength of a medicinal product. Tell me about that one.
The strength is a measurement of something that is weighed up or an efficacy measure based on assays. Same as for the dose form, the strength can be stated differently in different jurisdictions, but again, regardless of how the product is described in the product label or summary of product characteristics, the same product should get the same global PhPIDs, so also the strength information needs to be harmonized to get consistent identifiers.
There's a theme emerging, obviously, lots of information described in different ways that needs to be organized and harmonized. But I was wondering, when you said that the strength can be described differently in different places, how does that even come about?
Well, it could be different units used for the same active ingredient. For one substance, the unit could be, for example, milligram or international unit. For another substance, it could be viral particles or infectious units. This can vary between regions, but also in the same region. Another source of variation is if the strength is given as a total amount in the container or as a concentration. Some cases are more straightforward, for example, with tablets or capsules. There the strength is the amount in the tablet or capsules. It could be 500 milligram or something like that. But other cases are more challenging. I would say that solutions and suspensions and these type of liquid preparations generally require thorough investigation. There the strength is sometimes the total amount in the container, but it could also be expressed in percent or milligram per milliliter, or it could be milligram per 5 milliliter or per drop or per activation if it's a meter dose.
So that sounds quite complex, and I can imagine there's a lot you have to dissect and decide upon. How do you harmonize these differences then?
To harmonize this, we have developed 3 patterns for how to express the strength for PhPID. The patterns are 3 different groupings that, depending on what kind of product it is, define whether the strength should be expressed as a total amount, the presentation strength, or concentration. For example, milligram per milliliter, or if it should be a delivery rate over time, such as milligram per hour. The pattern framework and the business rules developed in GIDWIG are supporting us in creating PhPIDs that are consistent and according to the standards.
Olof, we're going back to you now. I know there are a bunch of different names and codes out there to classify medicinal substances. So why do we need new substance identifiers? I guess this is something a few of our listeners might be wondering.
Yes, I can imagine that, Fredrika. There are, and let me start with that usually when we talk about substances, we want to use a name and not a code. The code is more for the machine readable and to have it as a unique identity, because names can get translated and can be misspelled and so on. And the foremost name from an international point of view, what we use is the international non-proprietary name from WHO. And most substances, I would say, have such a name, which have defined. And it really makes our work so much more easier because a lot of the information is already there and it's well defined. But they don't really have all substances covered, really. They don't have, for instance, inactivated vaccines. And when it comes to salt forms of substance like ibuprofen potassium, that has what you call a modified INN. You take the INN and you add the salt variant to it and put them together. And this is a smart system that allows for a lot of names to be used even if they don't have to apply for a new INN the whole time. But you still need an identifier for that salt. So there are some things like that. Then we also have some regional identifiers or country-specific identifiers, like for example the UNI, the Unique Ingredient Identifier, that is assigned by the FDA, the US FDA, or like the Substance Management Service ID, better known as the SMS ID by the European Medicine Agencies, the EMA. They would cover a lot of substances, but they are not global, and they couldn't really take in a request from a third country, for instance, and so on. So that's in order to have a global PhPID, we need a global substance identifier as well.
And global standards obviously call for global collaboration. And this is an ambitious project, obviously, where many organizations have to collaborate because no single one can do it on their own. And in fact, there are many stakeholders involved in trying to bring the IDMP standards to life. Why has Uppsala Monitoring Center decided to join these efforts then?
Well, as you pointed out, the development of the IDMP standards as a whole, and then now we're only talking about the small subset of the IDMPs, or small, but the PhPIDs and the GSIDs. It's still not a one-man show. It's needed this collaborative effort. And by doing that together in the GIDWIG, the Global IDMP Working Group, we try to help out there. And one of the reasons why UMC is involved is our expertise as a WHO collaborating center for the International Drug Monitoring Program. And that is the pharmacovigilance program for advancement on a global scale. So we have the experience from that, and we also have the experience from our developing our WHO Drug Global Dictionary, and we've done that for many years, where we have knowledgeable and experienced co-workers, application and processes surrounding this area. And it's not exactly the same thing as the PhPID. The PhPIDs are not the dictionary, but the data validation around these has many similarities, how we look at building the PhPID and what we bring into the WHO Drug Dictionary. However, it is in, like Jenny pointed out before, with these rules that it's the GIDWIG that we discuss together with these other stakeholders and set the business rules how to implement the PhPID when we do that. So we execute on what the GIDWIG decides, one could say.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to explain the details of PhPID standards to our audience, and best of luck with everything that will come with IDMP development.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Olof and Jenny for that. They will also be joining the Q&A session at the end, so if you have any questions, now's the time to post them on Slido. But first, we have time for one more presentation. This one will be led by UMC's product manager, Marilina Castellano. She will explain how IDMP implementation is going to affect the WHO Drug Global Dictionary, which many of you are probably using. Over to you, Marilina.
Dear all, good morning and good afternoon. My name is Marilina Castellano and I'm working as a product manager for WHO Drug at UMC. I'm a pharmacist as background with a specialization in pharmacovigilance and regulatory affairs. I'd like to express my gratitude towards the audience, you, who has kindly allocated the time to listen in to this presentation, which will focus on how the ISO IDMP standard and HUDRUG come together. As you know, and as we have heard from previous presentations today, UMC is actively promoting ISO IDMP and collaborating with many stakeholders to make IDMP implementation a reality. At the same time, we are working hard to prepare our existing systems and processes to provide global pharmaceutical identifiers, PhPID, while also supporting GIDWIG development of business rules for both the GSID, the Global Substance Identifier, as well as the PhPID. And of course, as the provider of HUDRUG Global, we will continue to develop it for our users, but with the added benefits of IDMP integration. Global PhPIDs are a great tool that allows to identify equivalent pharmaceutical products. And therefore, when combined with medicinal product information, they achieve their full potential. On this slide, we can see how pharmaceutical products compare to medicinal products. For medicinal products, we have additional information such as the trade name, the country of sales, and marketing authorization holders. Here is a rough timeline for our efforts to ensure ISO IDMP compliance in HUDRUG Global. In our efforts to develop support for both global pharmaceutical products identifiers and global substance identifiers, we will continue to collaborate closely with regulators to support their requirements. And of course, we're also collaborating with many other stakeholders to understand the needs and expectations. The discussions held so far have resulted in a prototype, which I will present to you in the next slide. So if you have any feedback, please share them with us. And I also would like to stress that even after the launch of this IDMP compliant HUDRUG, the unmodified HUDRUG Global will be available in parallel. Now about the prototype. HUDRUG contains different information hierarchical levels for each medicinal product. That includes information levels limited to drug name, ingredients, and ATC codes, and information levels based on country of sales, marketing authorization holder, pharmaceutical forms, and strength. And this is to allow accurate drug coding that can reflect what was actually reported on an ICSRs. HUDRUG will be extended with global substance identifiers and pharmaceutical product identifiers. And as you can see on this slide, pharmaceutical product identifiers will be assigned depending on the level of information available to a particular record. We can imagine a future where HUDRUG users will be able to browse the dictionary content and easily search and retrieve both pharmaceutical product identifiers and global substance identifiers. On this slide, we have tried to envision what this experience might look like in HUDRUG Insight, which is our dictionary browser. First, you would access the HUDRUG C3 format data to see the different levels of pharmaceutical product identifiers for a specific product you are interested in, and you could also be presented with the inputs that were used to create a specific pharmaceutical product identifier. And while trying to envision how an IDMP-compatible version of a food drug should look like, we're of course considering what other improvements would be beneficial to our users. Up for discussion is what standard for dose form information should we maintain. Currently, we use the new form codes ePharma standard. These are important questions that must be discussed with the users, and we hope you will reach out to us with any feedback. Our hypothesis for the prototype is that ePharma will be replaced with IDQM basic dose form and unit of presentation. Additionally, domestic dose forms will be presented for each product depending on the country of sales. And here I have included examples for Norway, Brazil, and USA. For Norway, here is represented the appropriate pharmaceutical dose form from the IDQM terminology. The standard for dose form ultimately will impact ease of drug coding, compliance with regulatory recommendations when submitting safety reports, and effective analysis. Our vision is to provide a tool to achieve precise and accurate drug reporting in ICSRs, with support in domestic language, enable exchange and submission of harmonized medicinal product information internationally, and lastly, make it possible to retrieve medicinal information so to see the global picture. And with that, I now would like to conclude my presentation and thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Marilina. I'm looking forward to the audience's questions too. And actually, if you have any last-minute queries, there's still time to submit them. You know the drill by now, slido.com and #IDMP. And now it's finally time to welcome all speakers back on screen for the Q&A session. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's see, we got a few questions. Let's see how many we have time to answer. We'll start with this one, which I think is for Malin. How should a country proceed if they are interested in starting implementing IDMP?
Well, thank you, Federica. I think important is to start, of course, diving into the standards, having a look and trying to understand them. And there are also organizations like Citadel that can help to educate on the standards. Another important thing, I think, is to join the IPRP, International Pharmaceutical Regulators Program. They have a working group for IDMP, where there's a forum where regulators can exchange information on IDMP, get advice, and use the guidance and the checklist that the group produce. I think also one could reach out to companies and regulators that are already working on IDMP implementation. So that would be my primary advice.
Thank you. There's one for Marilina on WHO drug. Do you think WHO drug will be substituted by IDMP in the future?
Thank you for the question. Hello, Federica, and hello, everybody that is listening in. And yes, that's a great question. Thank you. Well, like we heard from Malin during her presentation and Ulle and Jenny during their interview, global pharmaceutical identifiers are a great tool that allows to identify equivalent
pharmaceutical products. And therefore, when combined with medicinal product information, they achieve their full potential. And in this sense, IDMP will not substitute WHO drug, but rather they will complement each other. And that is why we are working on extending the WHO drug global dictionary with ISO IDMP identifiers. And it should also be noted that it will take a long time before all countries will implement IDMP in their processes.
Thank you. And while you're speaking, I'll throw another one at you that's also related to WHO drug. The audience is asking, what will the role of coder be in IDMP implementation, and how will it change the current WHO drug coding process?
Thank you again for this question. And of course, it's very relevant. Well, when you are a medical coder, you are facing drug information in the form of drug name verbatims and other contextual information such as route of administration, strength information when reported, country, where is the report coming from. And we should think about two perspectives. We have the medical coders both in the clinical trial settings, as well as now we have emphasis in the post-marketing surveillance setting, right? So when you work with drug verbatims, you read a text and you want to continue be doing that. You want it to be easy to find what is the best match in a dictionary for that. So of course, there are two things to think about. One is how do we make it easier for coders to continue coding the way they are coding today, but also how will guidance around coding change with the implementation of IDMP, and what would be the expectations of the regulators, because we need to think around that too. So the guidance around it, thinking about there is a trend of capturing more detailed information, but also keeping in mind to make it easier for coders to select the easiest match for what they have in front of them. I hope that answers your question, Richa. Thank you.
Thank you.
And anybody, if you want to add something, and the rest of the panelists, of course, please do.
If not, then we'll take another WHO drug question. The order here on Slido keeps shifting as people upvote questions, so I suggest we start with the most popular ones. And obviously, there's a lot of interest in how IDMP and WHO drug are going to work together. So the next one, Marilina, again for you, is will WHO drug insight incorporate changes with IDMP, or would there be separate browsing provided?
Thank you very much again for this question. And like we said, we are working right now on extending WHO drug information with ISO IDMP identifiers. And today, of course, the dictionary browser is WHO drug insight. We're still investigating whether WHO drug insight would be the browser for this extended version of WHO drug too, of course. But what we're thinking also about is that, like we said, it will take a long time before countries implement ISO IDMP identifiers, right? And at the same time, we have B3 and C3 format users. And like we said, we want to continue maintaining those dictionary and continue maintaining and supporting their needs in WHO drug insight. So we need to be mindful of both supporting the current WHO drug B3 and C3 format users, and at the same time supporting the new users of the extended ISO IDMP version. Whether that will be happening in the same browser or in different ones, it's still under discussion, and we look forward to your feedback if you have any, of course. Thank you.
Thank you for that. There's a question on clinical development of medicinal products. So Magali writes, IDMP seems to be more focused on marketed products, but what about products in clinical development? Would they have to comply with the same standards? Olof, would you like to take that one?
Yes, I can start at least. Well, it is focused right now on the marketed products because we have to start somewhere. And on marketed products, we have the information about what's included in them in the different countries. So it's easier to actually see that we can work and create business rules for that. But in principle, all these standards can be applied to the ones under clinical development. And we know that from discussions within GIDWIG, with the industry and different stakeholders there, that they are interested to also maybe have these a bit earlier, especially like have a substance ID that you could have quite early in the process, at least for chemicals that don't shift that much. But maybe a PhPID wouldn't be a big use to start until like phase 3 or something. But it's still under discussion, all of these. But the standards can be applied, and why not start early so you are ready for it? Because it's a good way to describe both substances and the form and the products in the end.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add something to that?
No, I think that was a perfect answer, Olof.
Thanks.
Thank you. We move on to the next one then. Let's take this one on herbals, vaccines, and other types of medicinal products. So the question is, are herbals and vaccines and other types of medicinal products like contrast liquid, traditional medicine, are they included in the first PhPID calculations?
I guess working with substances, I can take that one as well. Well, yes and no, I would say. Maybe these are tricky ones, these that's called like structural diverse, the herbals and vaccines. Most of them are that type of substance type. And you can hear it on the name, structurally diverse. So it needs a lot of different sort of business rules around and how to define them in details. And we worked a bit with COVID vaccines and produced some PhPIDs there. And we are working on the vaccines, more traditional ones as well, the inactivated and so on. But we're not really there yet, coming up with all which level in this you should use, etc. So I don't think they will be the first one out, but I think it will come later. And we started working with the herbals as well. But they are complicated ones, and we want to do not just rush it through, because this will be there in a long time and we wouldn't like to change it straight away. So better we start with chemicals, for instance, and proteins and nucleic acids and so on.
Thanks. What will IDMP mean for pharmaceutical companies? What kind of changes will they bring for them? Marilina, is this one for you, perhaps?
Yes, sure. Thank you so much for this question. So, of course, when something new is introduced, the first question is how will this impact us? And changes impacting pharmaceutical companies will ultimately depend on regulators in each country. Plus, it should be noted, like Malin discussed in her presentation initially, that IDMP can be beneficial for different use cases. Earlier, we got questions about medical coding in pharmacovigilance, in post-marketing surveillance, but There are other use cases too, such as drug shortages, prescription. In this context, therefore, different departments at each pharmaceutical company should closely follow implementation plans for each country and regulators' expectations, so to be prepared to adjust their processes and best practices around it.
Staying up to date, I guess, is the best preparation, as you say, and then we'll see what it'll really mean in the months to come. A question on local languages. So as IDMP uniquely identifies each medicinal product globally, will it also keep information in local languages like Chinese, Japanese, and so on? Our listener writes. Olaf, maybe for you?
Yeah, I'll start, and then please help me out here, the rest of you, if I miss something. Well, the IDMP, they're basically codes, you know, the IDMP identifiers, and not in a particular language then, but we know that, for instance, you have substances in different language. So maybe those could be, we have talked about maybe having translations, and so we know what the GSID represents, but it's most likely to be like when each country implements IDMP, they will have their information in their own language, of course, and then they will be linked to the global identifiers. So and they should probably have that information about the products, their local dose form, for instance, and so on. But in WHO drug, we have, as Marilena pointed out, there's going to be linkage with the global identifiers in WHO drug. And for instance, we have the WHO drug global Chinese and then the link Korea. And they, of course, will then be linked via WHO drug in a way to a local language, you could say.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
If anyone else wants to add to that, please do. Otherwise, we move on to the next one. No? Okay. So, we have a philosophical question here in some way. Why is IDMP needed? Why not just use WHO drug all the time? Maybe, Malin, we go to you for that.
Yeah, I can really see that that's a relevant question, since WHO drug has great similarities to IDMP. It contains the kind of basic elements describing the dose form and the strength. I think the difference is that WHO drug tries to describe what is actually on the package, so what's shown on the package, which isn't always really representing what's in the actual substance that's in there. And so by adding more information about that and more granularity about, for example, the substance and the strength and the dose form, I think one could have really good benefits in analysis of its data. So for example, for substances, WHO drug today doesn't cover adjuvants in vaccines, and we've struggled with that for many years. By using IDMP, you can add this information as something that you can have as a parameter in your analysis. And it's similar for dosing. So it's usually very hard to know how much did someone take of a specific concomitant medication. And by having better information on the strength, that information can also be clearer. And that's something that at least UMC look at a lot when we analyze reports from different countries. So I think IDMP will bring an additional dimension and good additional information.
Thank you. And maybe you want to answer the next question too. As a pharma company, how can I prepare for IDMP implementation now?
Yes, I think we had a similar question before, but I think really what you should do is that you follow the development and you start to look at your data. What does it look like? How far am I compared to the ISO standards? and can I start to harmonize some of my data myself? I think those are the most important things, and then to look at the different departments at your company, and where could I have a master data in-house that all the departments could use. I mean, I know that's the case in some companies, but for some that is not the case, and it's a big hindrance. And I think there are great benefits also, and you know, money to save if you can harmonize your data internally.
Thank you. So that tied in well with what Marilina said earlier about different departments at pharmaceutical companies. So hopefully now we answered doubts in our audience on that topic. Back to you, Olof, for a question on substances. Would a drug with multiple active substances, which could vary in concentration from one country to the other, have distinct PhPIDs?
Yes, and we have to look at the different levels of the PhPIDs here, because if you have a combination of 2 or more substances, you add them as the individual one. So on the PhPID level 1, it will be the combination of the different substances, like substance A and substance B would have 1 PhPID. And that would be the same no matter what the concentration would be in there. But then if you add other levels, like you have the strength level on the level 2. So if you have different levels there, that you have 5 milligrams of substance A and 5 of B, and then you have 10 milligrams in the second one and 5 of the other one, then they would get the PhPID level 2 would be different, and then also level 4. So it depends a bit how you look at this, but basically, if they're similar in strength, dosage, substances, they would have the same PhPIDs.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Should low and middle income countries implement the IDMP standards? Malin, maybe you want to take that one?
Yes, sure. I think that LMICs also, I mean, could greatly benefit from IDMP, especially since they usually import a lot of medicines, and in that exchange, it's really good to have a harmonization of the data. But it is a big hurdle. I mean, there is a substantial effort to harmonize your data. So I think what one could look into is try to look at, for example, starting with the substances and maybe use the upcoming global substance identifiers and get that as a help to harmonize your own data. But I think that the short answer is that yes, I think it's worth the effort moving forward.
And how will the standards affect Vigiflow or similar systems? One of our listeners asks. For example, will the user select from the product list all the elements included in the code that will be filled in?
Yes, we haven't looked exactly at the implementation, but what we envision in Vigiflow is also a combination of using WHO-drug and the new global identifiers, so that if a patient reports what's on the package, you can use WHO-drug, and usually you will recognize that information, and then that is linked to the PhPID and the global substance ID, and then that information is further linked to more granular information. So I think depending on the regulator and how they prefer to code, you may code still to WHO-drug, or you may code directly to the IDMP identifiers, but I think the end result will be the same since we're linking this information together.
Mm-hmm. And there's a question here on who is assuring data. I guess they mean data quality, but who is assuring data use for PhPIDs? Is it the marketing authorization holder, the national competent authority, or UMC, they ask?
I think I can take that one. I think it will be a combination. So I think the market authorization holders, they really sit on the truth. And there, this a big initiative to create an IDMP ontology where market authorization holder can publish their non-confidential information about their drugs. So with that upcoming, there will be more data available, but then the national competent authorities also need to standardize that data that they get from the market authorization holders to make sure that it's kind of standardized in a proper way. Then UMC's role is to take these data, because there will still be local terminologies. I think there will be many years until we all use the same terminologies. So then UMC's role is to take these data from the market authorization and the ANCAs and then harmonize it in order to create the global identifiers. So it's really a joint effort that we're looking into.
Thank you for that. Does anyone want to add anything? If not, I suggest we take one final question before we wrap up. But thanks again, everyone, for submitting so many questions. This one, I think, is for you, Olof. Should investigational products also be in the WHO drug DB, the database, I assume? What about information normally hidden formulations, strengths that a marketing authorization holder might not want to share?
Yes, I think this also is a continuation of the questions I had before about clinical development, etc. And as I said in that answer, there is discussions ongoing, because from what we have, we will only have like public data at UMC. We won't have the confidential information. So if we're going to go down the track of having more on the clinical side when it's not released structures for substances, etc., or if it's trade secrets strength, then we have to work around that. If the industry would like that, then we have to find some way to collaborate with the industry and regulators to get that information, or at least get confirmation of that. But that's still ongoing discussions, and I guess they will continue on for a while. But we won't take any hidden formulations, something like the industry, if they don't want to share, they don't share, basically. And then maybe you don't get the PhPID. But if the regulators say, yeah, you need that, then there has to be some way to construct that. But for now, we don't aim to take any secrets.
No. Thanks for that. Is there anything any of you want to add about that question or about anything that's been said before, something you feel you need to clarify? Happy? If not, then let me thank you all for sharing your time and expertise with us today. And of course, thanks to all of you in the audience for tuning in and asking all these interesting questions. We got to a lot of them, not quite all, but you can find more information on the IDMP standards on UMC's website. So do visit that if you want to learn more. We are holding a second session of this webinar at 17 Central European Summertime tonight. So if you know someone who'd like to attend, do encourage them to register. Handouts of the presentations will be available here in GoToWebinar to download, while the recording of the session will be available later on the UMC website. As I said at the beginning, we will also send round a short survey afterwards, so please take a few moments to tell us what you thought of this. It'll help us improve for future events. And with that, I thank you again, wish you a good day or a good evening, and thanks again for tuning in.
Bye-bye.